Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging headfirst into what is, well, unequivocally one of the most significant global events, really, of our time. We're talking about a massive recent military strike launched by the United States against Iran's nuclear facilities.
Yeah, this isn't just another headline. It's seismic, a real shift.
Absolutely. And our mission today in this deep dive is to meticulously unpack all the layers. We want to use our sources to understand exactly what happened and, the intricate web of reasons why it happened, especially when it did.
Critically, what could possibly come next?
Because right from the get-go, the instant this news broke, the air was just thick with confusion. You had these conflicting narratives battling it out. It just pulled everyone into this really high-stakes drama unfolding in real time.
Indeed. And what's truly striking, I think, is how immediately that narrative fractured.
Right.
It wasn't one clear story. It was diametrically opposed accounts right from the start. And like you said, this isn't just a military action. It's a profound geopolitical event. It's created, frankly, far more questions than answers. And it's marked this new, arguably much more dangerous chapter in the U.S.-Iran relationship.
Yeah, that long, tense relationship just got a whole lot more complicated.
The implications go way beyond just the targets themselves.
Okay, so let's delve deep. Let's really unpack this. The very first thing that jumps out from our sources is this glaring contradiction.
Right.
Moments after the strike.
Right away.
On one side, you've got former President Donald Trump. And he was remarkably quick, claiming a spectacular military success.
Almost instantly.
Almost instantly. And he wasn't vague. He specifically named 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan.
Right, the big ones.
The big ones. And he really highlighted Fordo, called it the most dangerous target, the one everyone's been watching.
The one the intelligence community has been, very focused on for years.
Exactly. But then, almost simultaneously, Iranian state media.
A completely different story.
Total denial. Swift, unequivocal. Their claim was simple. Nothing happened.
Yeah, intact and perfect, I think was the phrase they used for the facility.
Intact and perfect.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, you're presented with this huge, almost theatrical gap. What really happened? The world was just reeling.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the sheer scale and, importantly, the precision of the U.S. operation, well, the details coming out, especially from sources like the New York Times, they paint a picture that's fundamentally at odds with Iran's quick denial.
Okay, so let's get into the how, because that seems key here.
Exactly. The how reveals the unprecedented power and, the strategic thinking behind it all. It becomes blindingly clear. Our sources consistently point to Fordo, described as the most complex facility for the U.S. and for Israel, too, to actually target effectively.
Why so complex?
Well, the why is critical. Fordo isn't just some building. It's a fortress.
Right.
Buried deep, deep underground, under layers and layers of rock, reinforced concrete. It was literally engineered to withstand conventional bombs from the air.
Built to survive.
Precisely. So, to even hope to neutralize a target that hardened, the U.S. deployed the GBU-57, the bunker buster bomb.
The bunker buster. Heard about this.
Now, this isn't just a big bomb. It's an engineering marvel, really, designed for exactly this kind of job. Its weight alone is staggering, 13.5 tons.
13.5 tons.
But that's only part of it. What makes it a bunker buster is its hardened steel casing and this unique delayed fuse.
Delayed fuse?
Yeah. So it allows the bomb to penetrate through tens of meters of rock and concrete before it detonates.
Wow.
Creating this massive destructive cavity deep inside the earth. And initially, get this, even seasoned military commanders reportedly had doubts. They weren't sure if a single one of these monster bombs would be enough to actually take out Fordo's extreme fortifications.
That really says something about Fordo, doesn't it? If one 13.5-ton specialized bomb might not be enough, the resilience is just mind-boggling.
It is, and this is where the strike moves into truly unprecedented territory. The New York Times initially reported 6 GB-57s dropped on Fordo. 6
of them. Okay.
But wait, a critical detail emerged shortly after. Other sources quickly revised that number up. 12 GBU-57 bombs.
12 on one facility.
12. Think about that. 12 13.5-ton bombs designed for the toughest targets on the planet, all hitting one single facility.
I can't even picture that level of force.
Our sources highlight it as an unnatural amount of tons of explosives
Right.
just unleashed on Fordo. The clear strategic intent, reading between the lines of these reports, was to ensure nothing was left to chance.
No margin for error.
None. This wasn't about sending a message and just damaging it. This was about outright, total, immediate incapacitation.
Complete destruction.
Exactly. The U.S. wasn't aiming for symbolics. This was a signal of complete annihilation for that facility.
So Fordo got this overwhelming attack. What about Natanz and Isfahan, the other two Trump named? How are they hit?
They also faced a significant show of force, absolutely, but with different weapons. Our sources confirm they were hit by 30 Tomahawk missiles.
30 Tomahawks.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, Tomahawks are also incredibly precise. They have some bunker-busting capability, too. But they're not designed for that same level of deep penetration against, super hardened buried targets like the GBU-57 is.
That's a tool for a slightly different job.
Right. They're more versatile cruise missiles, high accuracy against ground targets. But still, deploying 30 of them on just 2 facilities.
That's massive saturation.
Absolutely massive. It makes it incredibly difficult for those facilities to survive with any real function left. The sheer volume just ensures the target area is completely covered.
An incredible level of coordinated power.
Yeah.
And the delivery method. You mentioned the B-2s for Fordo.
Mm-hmm.
That's just as fascinating. Our sources detail this astonishing 36-hour nonstop flight.
36 hours.
And crucially, not from nearby bases, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not from the USS Nimitz carrier group or Diego Garcia or even Israel, where a B-2 was spotted recently.
Mm-hmm.
They came all the way from the U.S. mainland.
What's the strategic thinking there?
That seems incredibly long and complex.
That's a critical question, isn't it? Why undertake this marathon 36-hour flight when you have assets much closer?
Yeah.
Well, our sources point to a few layers here. First, preserving the element of surprise. That was paramount.
Makes sense. Iran would be watching those nearby bases.
Constantly. Intelligence suggests they monitor regional bases, carrier movements, looking for any unusual activity, any spike that signals an attack might be coming.
Right.
Launching from the U.S. mainland, that drastically cuts the chance of early detection. It enhances the surprise factor significantly. I mean, this feat requires multiple mid-air refuelings, crew shifts. It ensures the attack really does seem to come out of nowhere.
Okay. Surprise is key. What else?
Secondly, and this is perhaps even more profound, it sends a very powerful message.
To Iran or wider?
To Iran, certainly, but also to the entire world. It dramatically demonstrates that the U.S. has this unique capability to strike anytime, anywhere, without needing a big, visible regional buildup of forces first.
Global reach.
Exactly, projecting overwhelming power that isn't tied to geography. It reinforces that idea of the U.S. being able to execute these complex, long-range missions with stealth and precision. It basically says you can hide, but you can't run.
Wow.
And then, for the Tomahawk launches on Natanz and Isfahan, they use submarines, again enhancing that surprise element. Stealthy delivery.
So overwhelming force, precision, surprise. It's a lethal combination.
It really is. A testament to force coupled with very sophisticated, unexpected delivery.
So putting it all together, what does this mean? The picture emerging is just overwhelming force. Meticulously calculated, precisely executed, aimed at total, undeniable destruction, not just damage.
Annihilation.
It's a level of power that's hard to fathom, which makes this next point so fascinating, doesn't it? With all that immense power hitting deep underground uranium enrichment facilities, how were there no reported radiation leaks from Fordo?
Right.
That seems almost miraculous, given the targets, given the force involved.
This is one of the most perplexing and maybe most important questions in the aftermath. How could a strike like that on facilities dealing with radioactive material result in 0 reported leaks?
It's a huge puzzle.
Especially since all 3 facilities are involved with uranium processing in some way. The Washington Post tackled this directly.
And what do they suggest?
They introduced a major theory, highly speculative maybe, but compelling, that Iranian forces might have actually transferred the enriched uranium from the Fordo facility before the strike hit.
Moved it. Beforehand.
That's the speculation. This preemptive move, the Post suggests, would explain the absence of radiation leaks despite the massive bombardment.
Yeah, that would explain it. But even if they moved the uranium, Fordo itself must be devastated.
Oh, absolutely. Even if the uranium was gone, our sources are emphatic. Fordo is effectively out of service for several future years. Years. The structure, the critical infrastructure, It's so thoroughly destroyed. It's an enormous long-term setback for Iran's nuclear program. Regardless of where the uranium ended up, the immediate capability is just gone.
Okay, here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. Moving from the military strike itself to the political chessboard, particularly the timeline. Trump's decision-making, it was surprising, fast.
Very much so.
Our sources lay out this fascinating sequence. Trump publicly gives Iran a 2-week ultimatum.
I remember that.
But then strikes in just 48 hours, less than 2 days.
Yeah, the turnaround was incredibly quick.
The reports say, on a Thursday, Trump declares Iran has 2 weeks. Choose absolute peace and unconditional surrender or face catastrophic scenarios.
A pretty clear threat.
Very thinly veiled threat. But then what's wild is right after that press conference, reporters press him, are you actually going to strike Iran? He refuses to confirm anything, just says, I'm not going to tell you.
Classic Trump.
And then, almost nonchalantly, it seems, goes on vacation.
Yeah.
Plays golf, comes back, has this remarkably short 45-minute National Security Council meeting, and then gives the order. Go.
45 minutes to greenlight an operation like this.
Seems incredibly brief. This whole acceleration from a public 2-week window to striking in under 2 days, it just screams Trump's unique, unpredictable style.
It really does. What's fascinating here is how this feels like a quintessential Trumpian move.
How so?
Well, it relies heavily on surprise, right? Bypassing established protocols, using psychological pressure. This goes beyond just military strategy. It seems deeply rooted in his particular political approach, his negotiation style.
Bypassing protocols.
Yeah.
Like Congress.
Exactly. The New York Times highlighted this crucial detail. Trump reportedly only informed Republican representatives about the strike beforehand.
Only Republicans, not Democrats.
Apparently not. He intentionally didn't notify Democratic leaders, which, predictably, led to immediate, sharp criticism. You had figures like Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, publicly accusing Trump of dragging us into war without proper congressional consultation. This kind of unilateral approach, deliberately going around broader legislative buy-in, especially on something this major, it's a hallmark of his decision-making, as documented in our sources.
A preference for speed over consensus.
Speed and unencumbered action, yes. Even on literal matters of war and peace.
That's a huge political risk, isn't it? Alienating half of Congress on a decision with such massive global consequences. And the domestic impact. Did it cause ripples here in the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. Tangible shockwaves. Our sources confirm the anticipation of Iranian retaliation was so real, so significant, that U.S. state governors, including California's Gavin Newsom, felt they had to take strong measures to secure their states.
Really? Governors taking security measures?
Yes. This wasn't just some vague alert. It reflected a palpable national state of heightened concern. It suggests the strike was seen as having immediate, potentially widespread domestic consequences.
So people were genuinely worried about attacks within the U.S.
It highlights the perceived threat of Iranian retaliation, absolutely. Now, the U.S. military, for its part, reportedly felt confident. They calculated, according to sources, that they could absorb whatever Iran might throw back at them.
Like what? What kind of retaliation were they expecting?
Well, things like strikes on Israel's Dimona nuclear reactor, maybe mining the Strait of Hormuz, a huge choke point for oil.
Right, that would cause chaos.
Or even direct attacks on U.S. bases throughout the Gulf region. The calculation suggests a high degree of confidence in U.S. defensive capabilities and maybe a willingness to accept some fallout.
And beyond the strategic side, there's this personal layer to Trump's motivation that sources mention, the alleged assassination attempt.
This raises a really important question, doesn't it? How much was this driven by personal feelings, by retribution?
What did the sources say?
Our sources detail quite meticulously that Iran had allegedly tried to assassinate Trump.
Tried to assassinate Trump?
Yes. They specifically name Farhad Shakiri, reportedly a high-ranking figure in Iran's Quds force, as being involved in planning an attack targeting the former president.
Wow. I hadn't realized it was that specific.
It suggests this wasn't just strategic calculation. The strike might have been, at least partly, an act of personal revenge for those alleged plots.
That adds a whole other dimension.
It really does. And if we place this back into the bigger geopolitical picture, Trump's actions here, they unequivocally signal an end to any kind of nuclear negotiations with Iran.
No more talks.
It seems that way. His demand, consistently outlined in our sources, is for unconditional surrender, nothing less.
Unconditional surrender, like World War II style.
That's the reported vision. He apparently envisions this dramatic scene, echoing the Japanese emperor signing the surrender documents on the USS Missouri after World War II.
Seriously.
Sources suggest he allegedly wants to replicate that exact moment. Bring Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, onto a U.S. warship to sign a similar capitulation.
It's incredibly dramatic.
And
symbolic.
it's not about de-escalation or finding a middle ground. It's about forcing a complete, utter surrender of the Iranian regime.
And this happened despite warnings. I thought Russia had cautioned against this.
They had. What's striking is the U.S. went ahead despite explicit Russian warnings against a direct military strike on Iran's nuclear program.
So defying Russia, too.
It underscores the U.S.'s confidence, perhaps, in its overwhelming military edge and its willingness to absorb any potential blowback, even from a major power like Russia.
Okay, so let's shift gears now. Let's look at Iran's side. The Atlantic calls this phase enemy foot, or the enemy's move. I like that framing.
It's a classic strategic concept, yeah.
It's Iran's turn,
Yep.
their move. And the whole world is just watching, holding its breath, waiting. Our sources paint this picture of initial confusion, strategic ambiguity from Tehran right after the strike. First, there was this absolute silence, a deafening quiet for critical hours.
Right, which is telling in itself.
And then, just a brief, terse statement, basically affirming their right to respond, which is pretty standard diplomatic language, right? A placeholder.
Exactly. Doesn't commit them to anything specific yet.
Then, eventually, Iranian state TV did show images of Fordo on fire.
A visual admission, finally.
Right, admitting the strike happened, at least visually. But simultaneously, they kept denying widespread destruction.
Mixed messages.
Very mixed. Admitting the strike, downplaying its severity, but also promising revenge. It feels like calculated ambiguity, trying to manage expectations at home and pressure from abroad.
And this immediately raises that key question. Why the delay in a clear response? Why the ambiguity?
Yeah.
And more importantly, what are Iran's options now, given that our sources suggest pretty much all of them are bad?
A tough spot.
The initial silence, the mixed messages, they aren't accidental. They strongly suggest a deep internal struggle, a painstaking assessment of really limited, really difficult, high-consequence choices.
They're caught in a bind.
A truly unenviable strategic bind, yes. And here's a critical detail reported right after the strike. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, apparently went into an underground bunker.
Into a bunker.
That's what sources indicated. And this isn't just symbolic, it has real operational implications.
How so?
When the top civilian leadership retreats like that into a hardened, secure location, it effectively means that critical decisions, especially about a military response, are likely being made by military leaders.
The military takes charge.
It shifts the decision-making authority. And that strongly suggests the response, whatever it is likely to be a strong military decision,
Right.
with maybe less room for traditional diplomacy or negotiation.
Okay.
When the military takes the reins in a crisis like this, especially when national honor and security feel attacked, their instinct often leans towards force.
So less diplomacy, more military focus. That sounds concerning. What was the official reaction then from the foreign ministry after the silence broke?
Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, came out pretty quickly with a public statement. He described the U.S. strike as shocking.
Shocking.
And warned unequivocally it would have dire consequences. He laid out Iran's legal position, too, calling it a blatant violation of international law and the UN Charter.
Trying to rally international support.
Yes, right. Trying to get international condemnation of the U.S. action. And crucially, he affirmed Iran retains all options to defend our sovereignty and people.
Which is code for, we reserve the right to hit back.
Precisely. Classic diplomatic phrasing. It's a clear warning, even without specifying how they'll respond. And it's worth remembering, stepping back for a second, the fundamental reason for this whole escalation, this war footing, it goes back to Trump's demand. Iran must stop enriching uranium inside its own borders. Any enrichment has to happen outside Iran.
Which Iran has always refused.
Consistently, vehemently refuse, insisting on their sovereign right to enrich on their own soil. So the U.S. strike, in effect, has stripped Iran of its main bargaining chip, that overt nuclear program. It's forced them into a corner where their old position isn't really leverage anymore.
The strike changed the game.
It transformed the whole nature of the dispute, yeah. From negotiation to, well, an act of war.
And meanwhile, Israel seems to be playing a very active role, trying to box Iran in, limit their response options.
Extremely active, maybe even aggressive. Our sources detail these exceptionally intense, ongoing Israeli military operations in western Iran,
In western Iran, what are they doing?
actively destroying missile bases and strong military bases belonging to Iran. The explicit goal: to limit the Iranian response.
How does destroying bases in the West limit the response?
By degrading their Western military infrastructure, Israel effectively forces Iran to launch any retaliatory missiles or rockets from further east, from eastern Iran.
Ah, increasing the distance.
Exactly. Which has a couple of benefits for Israel and the U.S. One, it makes the launches easier to monitor by intelligence assets. Two, the increased range makes the missiles less accurate, reduces their effectiveness.
Clever. Degrade and pushback.
And at the same time, Israel's been hitting Iranian naval forces, targeting ships in the Gulf, the Arabian Sea, further crippling their ability to respond, especially in vital waterways like Hormuz.
So they're applying pressure from multiple angles.
Intense pressure.
Yeah.
And this leads us to what David Sanger at the New York Times calls the lesson from Israel.
Okay, what's the lesson?
Sanger analyzes Iran's last 3 big confrontations with Israel and draws some stark conclusions. First, Israel kills Ismail Haniyeh, a top Hamas leader, key Iranian proxy. Iran gives a Soleimani-style response, significant, calibrated retaliation, missile strikes, but avoiding all-out war.
Okay, measured response.
Second, Israel strikes Iranian air defenses, their advanced S-300 system, a direct hit on their capabilities. This time, Iran feared to respond directly, just put out a statement about their right to respond, no real military action.
A perceived weakness.
Definitely noted as such. And third, now we have this current conflict, the U.S. strike. Sanger's chilling lesson for Iran based on this pattern is brutal. If you don't respond, you will be hit. If you respond weakly, you will also be hit.
Wow. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, almost.
Almost. And the implication, strongly echoed in U.S. sources we're seeing, is that the ultimate goal here might not just be destroying the nuclear program anymore. It might actually be regime change.
Regime change, that raises the stakes exponentially.
Hugely. The war, in that view, isn't ending because the objective has potentially expanded way beyond just the nuclear sites. This puts immense, almost unbearable pressure on Iran's leaders to respond, and to respond strongly. NBC even reported expectations of an Iranian response within 48 hours.
48 hours. That quick.
Yeah, emphasizing that Iran must act quickly to save face, preserve credibility, deter further attacks.
That's a critical point. If the U.S. goal really is regime change, then Iran's response, or lack of one, becomes just another step in that bigger, more dangerous game. So, given that pressure, that lesson from Israel, one source says Iran must choose the strongest possible response. Why is that the thinking?
Because, as our sources explain it grimly for Iran, the consequences are the same, regardless of how big their retaliation is.
How so?
A weak response or delaying too long in their calculus, that just guarantees more humiliation, invites more attacks. It confirms that devastating lesson from Israel.
So weakness is provocative in itself.
In this context, yes. A strong response, on the other hand, yes, it inevitably invites severe U.S. counterstrikes, potentially escalates things massively, but at least maybe it allows Iran to feel it has taken its right, defended its honor, its sovereignty, its dignity on the world stage.
A Pyrrhic victory, perhaps.
Perhaps. It's a tragic calculation. All immediate options lead to bad outcomes. They're trying to pick the least worst option for their long-term survival and image.
A lose-lose situation.
Pretty much. And here's the ultimate trap. The profound strategic dilemma for Iran. Any Iranian response, whatever it is, big or small, will be an invitation for America to enter the war on a much bigger scale and potentially directly cut off the head of the Iranian regime.
How does that work? How does any response become an invitation?
It's about the framing. Trump meticulously framed the initial U.S. strike as preemptive, not as an act of war itself.
Okay.
Sources recall him drawing this stark contrast. Osama bin Laden killed 3,000 Americans directly. Iran, in his narrative before the strike, hadn't done something equivalent on U.S. soil.
Setting a baseline.
Exactly. So now, any subsequent Iranian retaliation, even a limited one, could be easily recategorized by the U.S. as the direct act of war, the provocation that justifies a much more decisive, potentially regime-changing intervention.
So Iran is basically being dared to respond, knowing that response could trigger their own destruction.
It's a truly perilous no-win position for the Iranian leadership. Every possible move could lead towards their ultimate downfall.
So, given this incredibly precarious situation, what happens next? What does the future look like? Our sources, Tom Nichols at The Atlantic in particular, lay out 3 potential paths forward for Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And these scenarios, they range from bad to outright catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
Really emphasizes the high stakes, not just for Iran, but for the whole region, maybe the world.
Absolutely. And connecting this to the wider geopolitical picture, Tom Nichols' scenarios really hammer home the unpredictable, incredibly dangerous nature of this escalation. His analysis paints a pretty grim picture of Iran's extremely limited, very fraught choices. Each one has potentially devastating consequences.
Okay, let's break them down. Scenario 1.
Scenario 1, no retaliation. Basically, Iran swallows the blow. They opt for non-response to the U.S. strike. They stick to their initial story, facilities undamaged, nothing happened. Maybe they continue some existing proxy actions, perhaps against Israel or U.S. interests elsewhere, as if nothing happened, trying to keep up appearances.
Pretend it didn't happen. Keep them.
Yeah. From a global de-escalation standpoint, this might be seen as the best scenario. It avoids direct military conflict between the U.S. and Iran.
But for Iran itself?
It would be a devastating blow. Internally, to their prestige, their whole revolutionary narrative, they're standing among allies and proxies.
After all the rhetoric.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Decades of fiery threats about retaliation if their nuclear program was hit, then failing to respond. It would severely undermine the regime's credibility, home and abroad, could lead to internal dissent, erosion of regional influence. The psychological cost would be huge, a massive loss of face.
Okay, so huge loss of face, but maybe avoids wider war. Painful choice. What's scenario 2?
Scenario 2. Declaring war and direct retaliation. This is a big step up. Iran formally announces war against the United States.
It declares war.
Yes. Immediately escalates things from a specific strike to an overt, full-blown military confrontation.
And what would they do?
Likely retaliate directly against U.S. bases in the Gulf, hitting identifiable targets like Al Udeid in Qatar or the naval base in Bahrain, critical U.S. hubs, and very probably mining the Strait of Hormuz.
That again. The oil choke point.
It's their biggest non-nuclear leverage point. Closing or disrupting Hormuz triggers a massive global economic crisis instantly. Oil prices soar, shipping chaos.
What are the risks for Iran here?
Immense. Formally declaring war on the U.S., it's a military mismatch. Iran's conventional forces, especially air defenses, are just no match for U.S. tech and firepower.
So it's almost suicidal.
It's driven by that desperate need to defend Iran's reputation and honor. But ironically, sources suggest this path could lead to the war ending more quickly. Meaning a potentially rapid, decisive U.S. military action to neutralize the Iranian threat, given that huge capability gap. A swift, devastating outcome for Iran.
That sounds terrifyingly fast. Okay, and scenario 3, the one called the most dangerous. That sounds even worse.
Scenario 3, the most dangerous proxy escalation and wider war. This one is indeed the most perilous, because Iran doesn't act alone.
They bring in their proxies.
Exactly. They significantly activate their vast network of regional proxies, escalating through asymmetric warfare on multiple fronts.
Who are we talking about?
Sources specifically mention groups like the Houthis in Yemen. They've already condemned the U.S. strike as reckless, pledged to target U.S. ships in the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
Key shipping lanes.
Crucial bottlenecks. Then there's Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran's most powerful, best-armed proxy. They could launch rockets into Israel, target U.S. interests in Lebanon. This scenario envisions all of Iran's militias executing pre-planned strategies. A synchronized wave of attacks, potentially.
Like what kind of attacks?
Rocket barrages, drone strikes, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, maybe even terrorist acts against U.S. or allied targets around the world. A multi-front shadow war.
And the danger here is it spreads.
The profound danger is this proxy war could rapidly spiral into a much widening war, pulling in major global players beyond just the U.S. and Iran.
Like Russia. You mentioned their warnings.
Exactly. Russia warned the U.S. against this strike. They have deep strategic interests in the region, so the critical question becomes, would Russia intervene directly?
What would that mean?
That's the nightmare scenario. Direct confrontation between nuclear-armed powers, could it lead to nuclear war? Or would Russia, maybe like China, also kind of pretend not to see, tacitly accept the new reality, protect their own interests?
We don't know.
We don't. But it's notable that Iran's foreign minister, Arachi, was in Russia right after the strike.
Seeking help.
Sources imply he was implicitly seeking Russia's help, whether that's diplomatic cover, military aid, intelligence, or even direct intervention. It's an open, deeply worrying question. It highlights this scenario's potential to drag in others and escalate unpredictably.
It's clear the ripple effects could be truly global. Are there any clear military assessments on how these scenarios might play out?
Our sources are pretty consistent on this. There are no clear military assessments yet that can precisely predict the outcomes.
Too many variables.
Too many variables, too unpredictable responses. What is certain, though, is that this conflict, this whole situation with Iran, has entered a distinctly new phase. The United States is now officially a player in this specific nuclear context, a direct participant in a way it wasn't before.
They're in it now.
They're in it. And sources highlight a potential U.S. miscalculation. This idea that the U.S. thinks it can strike and leave, deliver a blow, withdraw, minimal long-term consequences.
But that won't happen.
The consensus seems to be that won't happen. An action this big inevitably has prolonged cascading consequences. It binds the U.S. more deeply into the conflict dynamics. Disengagement becomes much harder.
Okay, there's one more angle. This North Korea parallel you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
If Iran really did move the uranium.
Yes, this is fascinating and deeply concerning. If the Washington Post speculation is right, if Iran got its enriched uranium out of Fordo before the strike,
Then the what?
then they might pursue a North Korea scenario, meaning silently, covertly, trying to develop a primitive nuclear bomb using the 60% enriched uranium they already have stockpiled.
60% enriched.
Yeah.
How close is that to a weapon?
It's a significant step. Weapons grade is typically 90% or higher. But 60% is considered highly enriched, much closer than the low enrichment needed for power plants.
So it's enough to start.
It's enough to begin developing what sources call a primitive nuclear bomb. Maybe not a sophisticated deliverable weapon immediately, but a basic device. It requires much less additional work than starting from scratch or low enrichment.
And they could do this secretly.
That's the scenario. Develop it over the next few years and maybe later announce they have it, or threaten to use it.
A desperate move.
A desperate covert path. And our sources imply this ultimately points to the end of the Iranian regime or surrender. It suggests if Iran can't have its overt nuclear program as a deterrent or bargaining chip, its only other leverage might be the secret weapon path.
Yeah.
But that would trigger a massive international crisis. It challenges the whole non-proliferation regime. The world likely wouldn't tolerate it. It probably signals the regime's ultimate downfall or forced capitulation.
So as we wrap things up on this deep dive, wow, it's abundantly clear we've explored a truly unprecedented moment, maybe a defining one in global geopolitics. We've peeled back the layers of this overwhelming, precise U.S. strike. We've dug into the complex, maybe even personal motivations behind Trump's bold move. And we've looked hard at the perilous crossroads Iran now faces. The conflicting stories right at the start, the sheer force used, the strategic gamesmanship, it all paints this vivid picture. A region, maybe the world, teetering on the edge of a new, very unpredictable chapter.
It really does. And this whole situation, it powerfully raises an important question for all of us, doesn't it? In an era where information is so contested, where facts get weaponized, where the consequences are so incredibly dire, how do we, as informed citizens, navigate all these competing realities? How do we understand the true stakes?
That's the challenge.
Because the sources we've looked at today, they paint an undeniable picture. This conflict hasn't ended. It's just entered a new, much more dangerous phase. It's prolonged, it's deeply complex, and the element of time that's decisive now for everyone involved. There's no quick fix on the horizon here. It's an intricate, high-stakes chess match.
Well, on that note, we really hope this in-depth exploration has given you, everyone listening, a clearer, more nuanced understanding of this critical global event. Stay curious. Keep those questions coming. And most importantly, keep seeking deeper understanding in this increasingly complex world we live in. Until next time, keep digging.
Keep digging deep.
And make sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive wherever you get your podcasts.